Okay, everybody, it is that time of the week where I give you deck guides on the decks I've been playing throughout the week, and this one is going to be on Midrange Hunter. It's secretless, so don't worry about that. It's not the most degenerate form of Hunter, but it's still a Hunter deck nonetheless, and is fairly straightforward. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And if you happen to enjoy the show, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment. I am more than happy to answer any questions you guys might have about these decks, because this is just usually a general overview of the decks. It's not absolutely everything. So if you want me to be more specific, I could definitely try to do that for you. And also, this is broken up into 3 basic parts: an overview of the deck, changes I would make to the deck, and lastly, an overall deck guide and matchups and stuff. So hope you guys enjoy. So an overview of this deck, basically it's just your standard Beast Hunter. It's not necessarily full on face, but it is a lot faster than the secret version, and it's not quite as fast as Odd, and to be honest, I think that it's probably one of the better decks out there right now. There's the hybrid Secret Hunter, and then I think this one. And then I think it goes Spell Hunter. So I think this is the second best Hunter deck in the meta right now. Death Rattle Hunter isn't played that much, and I'm not personally impressed by it, but it's sometimes annoying. Anyway, this deck is just put beasts on the board, hopefully buff up a Savannah Highmane, not a Highmane, sorry, Scavenging Hyena. Although if you get out a Savannah Highmane, it's usually really, really good for you, because if you get to that point in the game and you get out a 6/5 or coin it out or something, the amount of responses that the opponent might have could be limited. And it has a death rattle, so if they do happen to remove it, you still have 2/2/2s on the board, which means that you could possibly take over the game even afterwards. Even if they remove the board, you still have some minions left, which is pretty helpful. And this deck is good in the current meta, I think, because of the fact that Priest is so popular, and I'll get into those matchups in a second, but it's decent into other Hunter decks, it's good into Priest, and it's okay into Paladin in my opinion, and it's pretty good into Rogue. So overall, I think this is a solid deck where you just try to flood the board, but in a controlled manner. You don't want to necessarily play everything. You want to hold some things back. Sometimes you want to wait a little bit, like combo off with a Tundra Rhino. That could be a really solid play. Or hold a Scavenging Hyena in your hand on 2 if that's your only play. Because if you're playing against someone who has a response potentially, it could mean that one of your win conditions gets killed off early. So just generally, it's a play a ton of beast kind of deck where you just go face, and you don't want to overcommit, but if you do, you have 2 Master's Call for giant, amazing draw options, and Rexxar to pull you into the late game. So if you do, it's not that big of a deal, especially if you have one of those 3 cards in your hand at the time. So the changes I would make to this deck are fairly basic. They're not like huge game-changing changes, but they're definitely changes that if you think about could be better into certain metas. So I teched in a Flare to help against Secret Hunter, but if you're not playing against as many of those, you could definitely take it out to add in a Savannah Highmane as an extra later game beast, or add in something to help you out in the early game. I don't necessarily know what you could do. You have a lot of 1-drops already, but maybe like, I don't know, a way to pump up your minions like a Dire Wolf to keep the 2-drop consistency and just cause your minions to have a little more oomph earlier on, because some games you're going to have to take over the game early, especially into Priest. And into Priest, not only is Flare useless, but if you were to replace it with something, you might want to replace it with something that makes that matchup better, because that's a matchup you really need to win with this deck. Other things that you could take out are a Tundra Rhino for a Savannah Highmane. That's really a personal preference kind of choice. They're later game cards with ups and downs. Next, you could take out and Unleash the Hounds, potentially, for a Savannah Highmane. Actually, I don't remember exactly what I took out, or took the Savannah Highmane out for, but I have 2 Unleash the Hounds and 2 Tundra Rhinos, which you could definitely take one of them out for Savannah Highmane, put in another tracking to help cycle through your deck. Potentially, I remember, yes, take out and Unleash the Hounds for Dire Frenzy if you want, take out a Tundra Rhino for Savannah Highmane if you want, and a Flare for something like a Dire Wolf in order to help you take control of the game. This deck, actually I'm going to get into the matchups later, but it's just curious now that I'm looking at the stats. This deck played against the most Paladins and Priests. Those are the 2 most popular decks this deck played against, which is why this deck had a 50% win rate. If it had played against more Priests and more Hunters rather than mostly Paladins, this deck probably would have been a little bit better overall, but We'll get into the matchups in a second, but anyway, those are the changes I would make to the deck. Other than that, this deck is pretty solid. Dire Frenzy's definitely helpful. It's more useful on the Srpingpaw than anything else, or maybe the Crackling Razormaw for adapts. Trying to think of what else. Or a Huffer if you get it with Animal Companion for some special little charge damage in your deck. But that's about it. Anyway, moving on to the actual deck guide, because this is where the stuff gets good. Okay, so quick side note, this is being done way after the rest of the guide because I ended up going on a huge streak to Legend. I played this game, or played this deck a total of like 30 more times, and in the last like 20, I think I went 15-5, which is actually insane. This deck had a 75% win rate right at the end of the game there, and honestly, I think it's a really, really good deck, really solid to climb with, pretty cheap, and I'll just jump into it because this is what you guys have been waiting for. Into just normal Odd Warrior, this deck doesn't do too bad in my opinion because they have no way of closing out the game. Quest Warrior and Odd Quest Warrior are different stories. The fact that they have the quest to do 8 damage to you every turn means that you can't drag the game on late with Rexxar. If you're able to get some cheap minions out as like cannon fodder for the Ragnaros, it can be okay, but you're still probably going to lose that matchup just because of the fact that they could get to the taunt, get to the quest, and you can't kill them fast enough because of the fact that they have a ton of armor. Even Shaman's the only Shaman you need to worry about, and it's a bad matchup for you because they have a wide board, ton of taunt, decent on lifesteal, and it's really just annoying to deal with in general. It's not terrible, but it's definitely not a good matchup either. With its wide board, Unleash the Hounds can pop off, which means that if you have like a hyena out there and then you Unleash the Hounds, it can be really, really, really good for you. But for the most part, it's just not that great. Unless you get Unleash the Hounds or wipe his board with Rexxar. That's the same thing with Odd Paladin. I'm just going to jump to it right now. It's a slightly worse version than even Shaman because it's just strictly stronger, in my opinion. But it runs in a very similar way, and if you can get out and Unleash the Hounds and you have a hyena on the board, or you Tundra Rhino, hyena, Unleash the Hounds, wipe his board, get a giant hyena and go face, it can still be okay. But I feel like both of those matchups are just bad because this deck doesn't do well against wide boards, but it can do well against some things with big dudes because of the Hunter's Mark and kill commands and stuff like that to deal with those kind of boards. And the fact that you can have 1/1 rushes that can potentially adapt into poisonous. And having 1-drops into these matchups is absolutely essential. Because if you don't have them, you're just going to get blown out. Because he's going to be able to play a few things early on and you're not going to be able to keep up. Warlock, you beat Warlock pretty handily. They do damage to themselves. Hunter's always done well in the Warlock. If you're not able to get a board state early, this is where 1-drops and 2-drops and 3-drops are absolutely needed. If you're not able to get a foothold early and he's able to wipe the board early with like a coin Hellfire, and you're not able to get out a ton of damage, oops, I dropped a penny, it could be bad, but for the most part, it's a pretty good matchup. Next is Odd Rogue. Odd Rogue is pretty good for you, I'd say, just because of the fact that he has to take damage in order to kill your minions, but to be totally honest, Hearthstone Replay says it's a bad matchup, and I totally see that too, because of the fact that he can control all of your minions. So it's something that you're going to have to look out for. But if he gets a little greedy and uses his weapon more times than trading with his minions, you can actually punish that and win the game off of it. But for the most part, it's just not... It's not a bad matchup for you. It's just not, in my opinion. Hearthstone Replay says it is, but I say it's around 50-50. It depends on how he plays and how you play and if you can get Rexxar. Priest. This deck beats Priest because of the fact that it can A, go long if it needs to against Control Priest, which is a little slower. B, rush the Clone Priest down faster than he can get to his combo. And C, just because Rexxar exists in the game. Like, there's nothing he can really do against that unless he's able to burst you. So as long as you can play controlled, not get your board totally wiped, play a little more controlled so Psychic Scream doesn't hurt you as badly, you'll probably win the game. Odd Mage beats you, and it's a worse matchup than Odd Rogue because it has the same power of Odd Rogue of being able to control your board, but it doesn't have to take damage in the face to do it. It also has some pretty decent board wipe, and if you play Secret Odd Mage, just some pretty decent creatures and card draw, and, you know, Cinder Storm, that just makes it really, really hard for you to get a foothold in the game. Last is Hunter. It loses to Spell Hunter and Secret Hunter, but that is why this deck techs in Flare. definitely increases his win rate a little bit, makes it winnable, especially if you're able to flare a ton of his secrets in one certain time. And then you have Odd Druid, which is apparently the only bad Druid matchup, which I've never even heard of before, and it's barely even played, so no real need to worry about that either. Mulligans basically want to keep 1-drops if possible. Not the Timberwolf, basically Srpingpaw or Diremole, maybe Candleshot into Hunter to test out secrets. You want to keep the Crackling Razormaw into pretty much everything, along with Animal Companion. Master's Call if it's a deck where you don't need to just go super hard aggro immediately. And even then, it's still a draw 3 for 3. Actually, I changed my mind. Definitely keep into pretty much every single matchup. So basically, Animal Companion, Crackling Razormaw, Srpingpaw Diremole, maybe Candleshot, and Master's Call. Flare actually into Hunter is not bad. Unleash the Hounds into Paladin is not bad. Scavenging Hyena into slower decks is not bad either. Anyway, this deck is absolutely insane. 100% would recommend it. Hope you guys enjoyed, and see ya.